All right. All right. So let's go. Recording. YouTube is recording. Let's see. Minimize it. All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Everybody hear me?
Yep.
All right. Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Share my screen. Everybody see my screen? All right. Okay. Let's see. Right. So we are starting week number 6, where we are going to introduce the topic of being able to program the database. Up to this point, we've been interacting with the database basically from a console. Well, not directly a console, but using a user interface that where we can type commands, maybe even have some user interface that will give us a graphical representation, maybe a tabular format, maybe some forms that allow us to create these commands, these SQL commands, and then they're sent over to be executed on a server, on a remote server. Remote, with quote unquote, right? So since the server is still running on our machine, right? It's not like it's being hosted, halfway across the world, right? So we have the UI client workbench, right, running locally in our machine, and also we have the server also running on our machine. Eventually, when we come back from the midterm, we're gonna check it out, see if we can run the database in a remote server, right? So we're gonna have our server running in a complete different machine, that might be hosted, halfway across the world, and we still want to be able to connect and interact with the database. So we'll discuss this a little later. But right now, the main way that we've been tracking is that we're using Workbench and send these commands to the database, and then have been mostly just declarative queries, right? Where that you declare that you want these columns from these tables that meet these criteria, right? And they execute on the server and they come back. And so there's some limitations on what we can achieve with that. So we're going to be introducing today programming the database. And first, we'll talk about store procedures, functions, and triggers. All right, we'll talk about those, and we'll introduce an assignment so that we'll get a chance to play around with that for a week or so. And then we'll also introduce some more advanced programming technologies that allow us to program the database, but from outside the database, right? So this week we'll practice how we can use, SQL's own store procedures, functions, triggers to encode logic inside the database. And then towards next week, or maybe later this week, we'll talk about how we can use programming languages to interact with the database, right? The programming language could be Python, it could be JavaScript, could be Java, C#, any programming language of your choice. In our particular course, we've chosen Java, since I believe you take a look at Java in other courses. So we're hoping that it's a language that you feel comfortable with, that you've already seen it in other of your courses, and so we'll play around with that as well. Okay. All right. So yeah, I believe we had already started discussing store procedures and functions and whatnot. So let's talk about it, but now in the context of the assignment. All right. So let's introduce the assignment for programming the database. Before we get into some administrative things, let's see. So we do have the assignment number 5 due tonight, I believe, and so we'll introduce assignment number 6 today, which will be due again a week from now. We do have a quiz later this week on Friday, And again, same thing, right? You'll have 48 hours to take the exam. It'll be available Friday morning, early morning, and it'll go through Saturday evening. Then next week, there'll be at the end of next week, there's a midterm, right? So next Tuesday, right, we'll have a review of the material. I will make available also later this week or later this weekend. I'll make available some sample exams so you can take a look at what the types of questions you'll be getting in the midterm, and we'll have a formal review next Tuesday. So a week from now, we'll have a review for the midterm, and there won't be any assignments for that week. So next week there won't be any assignments, so that you can spend the whole week just studying for the midterm. The midterm will give you more than just 2 days. We'll give you 3 days, so that you can take it anytime over the weekend. So you have more time perhaps to just study up a little more over the weekend perhaps. And so it'll give you more chances to feel comfortable with taking that exam. And then we would come back, we'll resume, and we'll come back and start talking a little more advanced topics of how more advanced ways of interacting with the database. We'll talk about our object relational mapping and things of that nature. Okay. So anyway, so that's the plan for the next couple of weeks. Any questions? No questions. Let's see. Let me put this on the chat. Will the answers of the previous quiz be open? Yes, we'll make all the quizzes available for you. All right, so let's see. Let's make sure that the syllabus is up to date. And we are on Tuesday, February 23rd. We're talking about functions, stored procedures, and triggers today. We'll introduce assignment number 6, which will be due on March the 2nd. So that's due next week on Tuesday, which we'll have a exam review. We'll also talk about the projects more in depth, right? And we'll have the exam later that week. And when we come back, we'll talk about object relational mapping. All right, so yeah, so the syllabus seems to be up to date. All right, so let's talk about the upcoming assignment. Let me fit this. All right, so the assignment is called Programming Relational Databases. And so this assignment is going to give us a chance to play around with programming the database using stored procedures, functions, and triggers. Okay, so we do give you a brand new database. Well, not so brand new. It's just the old database that you already have, with a little more data, right? So we ask you to download that data from GitHub, and it's the same schema from before, right? So the data might have changed, but the schema is the same. Right, and we are being asked to consider this database and be able to answer these 2 questions. One of them is which blogs are popular and which posts are popular. Okay, given the data for this schema, so I'm going to show you how to do the first question, right? Which blogs are popular. And then we're going to ask you to do on your own, right? Which posts are popular. Okay, so I'll do the first one, and we give you all the code. And even though it's the code that I give you, you still have to run it and make sure that the data comes back correctly. You need to copy all the code into a file, and you have to submit that file, just to make sure that you did indeed practice this, right? And then your own code. Using the example code that we give you and the analysis and whatnot, right? We ask you then to do it on your own. Okay. So let's first start by downloading the database that we give you. There it is. We can click on download. So we'll download it. If I open it, it creates a directory, and there it is in downloads, right? So basically, it's the same schema that we've had in previous assignments. I'm going to import that. Let's import it. So I'm going to go in one of these connections. And DB design, I already have a couple of functions and store procedures, just practicing and showing that how the solutions might be. So I'm going to just blow this away since we're going to rebuild this all from scratch. So let's drop all these store procedures, drop it, and we're going to drop these functions. I'm going to drop these functions. And I'm just going to import. I'm going to go and do server data import. I'm going to navigate to that directory. And the directory is under downloads, I believe. Downloads, and I believe it's this one. DB Design 2, is it? DB Design 2 under download. So it's this one. Okay. All right. And I'm going to say open. And I'm going to say start import. Okay, so that imports the data, and it's mostly the same data that we have before. I also had these views. Let me throw away these views. Same data we've had already, right? But it's got a couple more blogs, right? Maybe it's got a little more number of posts, right? Before we only had just maybe 2 posts. I added a couple more posts. I added a couple more ratings. Okay, I added a couple more replies. So just a little more data. Okay, so let me close all this. Okay, and let me close that. Okay. All right, so having imported that, let's close that. We want to be able to answer this first question. Okay, now I'm going to do most of my work, all the select statements that I'm going to be doing, any inserts, any updates, any deletes, any SQL query or updates, right? They're going to be done in this file, right? Popular blogs SQL. So that's what I'm going to be doing here for you right now. You're going to be working on the second half, this part, popular posts.sql, right? So I'm going to create a brand new query. I'm going to save it, right? And I'm going to call it popular blogs.sql. Okay, so all my work is going to be in there. Okay, so the first thing is we want to determine popular blogs. So how do we do that? Well, popular is somewhat vague. What do we mean by popular, right? So we might need to define what it means for a blog to be popular. So we're going to define popular based on the average number of likes. Okay, if a blog has a high number of average likes, above the average across all blogs, then we can say that the blog is popular, right? So we're going to make this question a little more concrete. We're going to say which blog. So this vague question is going to be converted into something more concrete, such as which blogs have an average number of likes higher than the average number of likes across all blogs. Okay. So that means that from this question now, we realize that we need to be able to answer several sub-questions, right? So for instance, average number of likes for all blogs. Well, what is that? We need to figure that out. What is the average number of likes for blogs? And then we need to figure out what is the average number for a given blog, right? Can I if I give you blog number 1, can I know what the average number of likes is it for that blog? And then if I can answer those 2 questions, right, A and B, right, what is the average number of likes for a given blog, and what is the average likes for across all blogs, I can then answer the question. I can say, well, it is popular if the average likes is greater than the overall average, right? And those that are below, then they're not popular. Okay, so that's what we intend by this question. Okay, so then we're going to tackle each one of the sub questions individually. Right. So, for instance, when you start analyzing the class diagram, you realize, right, that here you have the blogs over here, and here you have the posts, and down below you have the ratings. So the actual data, whether a particular blog or post is liked, right, is down here on the ratings, and it's associated to the post, not the blog. So we don't know whether a blog is liked. We know if a post is liked, but not a blog. Okay, so we realize that to to calculate whether a blog is popular, we first have to identify, which posts for that blog are popular, right? So we have to kind of roll up the likes for a post, for all the posts. And once we've rolled it up for a post, group those likes, average them out by post. We then need to average those out, right, across all the blogs, right? So having analyzed that, right, here's an example graphically what we're going to do, right? Here you have, say, a whole bunch of posts, right? And you have 3 posts, right? 1, 2, 3, then 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9. And the first 3 are for blog number 1. The second 3 are for blog number 2, and the last 3 are for blog number 3. Yes? Okay. And here we have also in color, right? We have the ratings for each one of the posts, right? So this is 3 ratings for post number 1, right? 3 ratings for post number 2, and 3 ratings for post number 3. Yes? So we could roll up an average, right? If we group this by posts, we can average out, right, the likes for each one of the posts. So if we group these 3 and we average out the likes, it comes out to be 0.33. Okay. If we average out the second post, right, we have again 0.33. But here, because we have 2 likes, the average goes up to 0.67 for post number 3. Does that make sense? Right. If we keep going and we group again by post number 4, again it's 0.67, 0.67 for post number 4. For post number 5, same thing. For post number 6, it's very popular, right? It's all likes. So it rolls up to just 1, right, for post number 6, and so on and so forth, right? So at the end, if we group by the post, right, ID, we can know what the average likes are per post. So we first can identify doing that, right? And the query to calculate all these, right, is this query over here, the average likes per post, right? So if I copy that and I bring it over, right, and I paste it in here, okay, I can now run this. I can run this, and it comes up that saying that post number 1 is 0.75, 0.57, 0.6, 0.83. Okay, right. So my data is different than what's graphically represented here, but so this is some of the posts in the blogs that are provided for you. Okay. All right. So that tells me this tells me the roll up per post. Right now, because now we want to roll up those values that we had per post, we want to roll them up into the blog. All right. So we could use this. We could use these results as a subset or subquery of a larger query. Correct? Right. So instead of doing that, right, what we're going to do is that we're going to create a view out of this so that we can reuse this as if this were a table. Okay. So let's do that. Let's copy that query. Let's grab that query, right? And we're going to wrap it inside a view. See that? So this query over here is this same query, but inside of a view. And we're going to call it, we're going to give it a proper name. We're going to say average likes per post. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to say here, create a view, new view. So this allows me to think about this query, by its name instead of remembering the name of that particular query I'm just going to put it inside of a view, right? So I'm going to do that. So there it is. There's my new view, right? So I'm going to save it. I'm going to run it, apply. There it is. Okay. So now that I have that, now that I have the view, notice that I did not put the view here in my popular blogs. Okay, I did not put the view here. I put the query here, but not the view. The view is in its own view here, right? You can, if you refresh, notice that you can see the view in there. See that? There it is. Okay. So this view later, you're going to submit this view as well. And the way you're going to submit it is that you're going to, at the end of the assignment, you're going to export. You're going to do a data export, which is going to include the view. Right, you're going to include all the views. You're going to include all the stored procedures, all the functions. Right, you're going to save all that, right, and submit the whole thing. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that at the end. All right, excellent. So now that I have that view, I can do a select. I can say select, right, select, can't type today, star from, and the view, right? So that's the view that we just created. If I run it, notice that the view gives me exactly the same result as my select statement. See that? It's the same result, right? But I don't have to, excuse me. Right, I don't have to remember the where clause and anything like that, or the grouping. This just allows me to treat the data as if it were a table. Okay. All right, excellent. So I created the view. So now that I have that, I can use this. I can use this new view that I just created to roll up, right, the popular posts. I can roll them up to calculate the popular blogs, right? And I can do that using this query. I can use this query, and this query, what it says is that I'm going to take the average likes per post view that I just created, that it has all the popular blogs, or at least a score, right, of all the blogs and averaging all the likes, and I'm gonna join that. I'm going to join the post with the posts table. I'm going to join it with the posts table, right? So that I can join then the post with the blog. I'm going to join it with the blog so that I can roll up by blog. And I roll up by saying group by the blog ID. See that? All right. So basically what I'm doing is that I have values for each one of these, right, per post. I know what the roll up is for this post. I know the roll up for this post, right? For each one of these, I know these, right? And now I want to group all these averages by blogs, right? So this is going to give me 0.44. So 0.44 is basically the average of 0.33, 0.33, and 0.67. And then 0.78 is the average of 0.67, 0.67, and 10, right? And then finally, the last one, 0.89, right, is the rolling up and grouping of 1, 1, and 0.67. Make sense? Right. So I'm just grouping it up higher into the blog. All right. So if I do that and I run this, let's see. Did I name this correctly? Per blog, averages per posts, unknown column p.blog ID. P.blog ID. Is it not blog ID? Let's see. It's blog, not blog ID. Okay. All right. I'll have to fix that. So this would be blog, just blog. Let me run that again. Okay, there it is. Right. So this tells me blog number 2 and blog number 3. These are the averages per blog. Okay. All right. Excellent. So let me fix that. So this is really blog, not blog ID, and here as well. Blog ID right here, just blog. Okay. All right. Excellent. Yeah. So that allows me to group into the blog. So again, I want to be able to now that I have it right now that I have the scoring of the average likes per blog, I can now ask, for instance, what is the average likes for a particular blog, right? Or I can ask what it is for across all blogs, which is what we want to be able to answer, right? So to do that, let's wrap this query that I just created. Let's wrap it into its own view. Okay, let's put another view, and let's put in that view there, right? Which is basically the same query we just had that we used 2 seconds ago, but now we're giving it a name. We're giving it a name calling, average likes per blog, right? So we're going to apply that. Excellent. Now that we have the view, we can easily now, we can now use that view that we just created to be able to answer the question, what is the average like for a specific blog, right? I can now use that new view that I just created, right? So that I can answer my first question, right? What is the average like for a specific blog number 2, right? So I can run that. And it tells me that it's 0.6667 something or other. Okay, so that's our first question. This is our first question this answers part A of our question. What is the average number of likes for a given blog, right? But instead of having it so, me having to deal with changing this 2 or 3 or whatever, right? Instead, what would be nice to have is a function, right? Is a function that would allow me to pass in the ID, right? And it would tell me what the value is. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to create a function. That is going to use that new view that we just created, so that we can then use it as a function. I can pass in an argument and then say, hey, blog number 2, what is the average likes for blog number 2 or number 3 or number 4? Right. So let's do that. Let's create a function. So let's say here in the functions, we can say create a new function, and I'm going to paste that function. There it is, right? Let's look at the function. So basically this function is what? Is the select statement we just wrote, right? It's this select statement right here. It's this same select statement. There it is. Oops. Where'd it go? Okay, there it is. Okay, let me break it up. This is a where. Right? Instead of having hard-coded 2, instead of having a hard-coded 2 here or 3, right? We have a variable blog ID, which we're going to pass in as an argument, as a parameter, so that I can call this function, pass the blog ID that I want, number 2, number 3, whatever I want. Okay, and it's going to say, well, take the view that we just created, right? Join it with the blog ID. Filter it by the blog ID that you pass as an argument, and store it in a local variable. Over here, we're storing it in a local variable called average likes. Okay, notice that I'm declaring here that a local variable called average likes, and I'm saying, select that value and put the value into that variable average likes. Okay, also notice that I'm limiting the results to 1. Meaning one row, okay? Meaning, if inadvertently this returns more than one value, right? I just want to take the first value, right? And that value, I'm going to store it in that local variable, and then I'm going to return that variable. Notice that I've declared that the variable is a float at the beginning, right? And that's what we're going to return. Make sense? Okay, so having created this function, I can now go back to my popular blogs, and now I can now call this function. I can say select, what was the name of the function? Average likes for blog. Average likes for blog, and I can pass number 2, and I can run that, and it comes back. There it is, 0.6667 something something or other. Okay, right, which is the same response that we were getting by using this over here, right? Same value. See that? And get the same value. Right? But now it's a function, right? Which makes it very easy to use, right? Because I can call it with any value. And so that's part A of my whole question, right? Part B is that we want to calculate the number of likes for all blogs, across all the blogs. We want to average everything out. And that's easy, right? We just need to group this entire table. We need to group this entire table. We need to group it, right, as if it were one single group, right? And then average out all these 0.44, 0.78, and 0.89. So to do that, it's this query over here. So let's paste that here, which is saying take the whole table, the whole view, right, that shows me all the averages for all the blogs, right, individual blogs. Take that as if it were one single group, right, and average out the values in there, okay, and name the grouped value into average likes for blog. Let's see, I think there's a question on the chat. Error, this function has no. Do you know what? Yeah, so yeah, we're not going to debug. I know, several of you might be trying to implement this already. Yeah, we're not trying to debug this in lecture, right? So I'm just showing you there'll be a whole week that we can help folks deal with individual issues. Okay. Let's see. Oops, wait a minute. Where'd it go? Chat. I love the chat. Oh, there we go. Yeah, please don't try to follow me and you know, maybe there's some syntactical error or whatnot, but you know, just follow along what we're doing, right? And then we can take a look at individual issues that each one of you might be having. Okay, so yeah, so this averages out the entire view into a single value, but this we also want to reuse this value, you know, to calculate per blog, right? We want to ask, right? If I know the average likes for a given blog and I know the average likes across all blogs, I can now do the calculation and say, okay, well, which one is the highest or lowest or below or greater than these likes across all blogs. So what we're going to do is that we're going to wrap this select statement into a function that we can then invoke multiple times. Okay, so we're going to grab that same select statement. There it is, right? There it is. All right, we're going to wrap it inside a function. Right, let's create another function. So let's see, let's create the function. I'm going to say function. Let's say create the function, and I'm going to paste the function. Oops, there it is. Right, there's our query. Notice that it's the same query as we had before. Right, it's a whole. It takes the entire view, right, groups it as one single thing, right, and it just wraps into a single value. Right, so let's apply that. And notice that it's storing its results. It's storing its results in a local variable, average likes, right? And that's what it's being returned as a float. Okay. All right. So now that we have both functions, we can now we can answer our top question, right? Remember, our first question had part A and part B. Okay. This answers part B, right? This answers part B of our question. Now we can use both of these, part A and part B, to answer our number one question, which blogs are the popular blogs, right? So we can write a query such as this one that says, okay, well, give me the names of the blogs, okay, and their average likes for that blog, right? Give me the ones whose average like for that particular blog is greater than the overall average for all blogs, right? So let's copy that. Right, let's go back to our popular blogs here. And now we can answer the final question. Right, we can run that, and there it is. It finds our single blog that has the higher average likes across all blogs. Right. Now, if you had more blogs or more posts, you might have several blogs that are above average, right? And those would be spit out over here. Okay. And notice that we're using the two functions that we just wrote here down in the where clause. Okay. All right. So that's the code that I'm giving you. I'm saving it in a file. You're gonna submit this file, right, alongside with your own file. You're gonna create a brand new file where now you're going to try it on your own. Right now, you try it. Okay. You're gonna create your own queries for determining popular posts. Okay, so same thing with popular blogs. We need to define what do we mean by a popular post. Okay. So we define popular blogs by the average like. Okay, that's how we determine whether a blog was popular or not. Here we're going to determine popular posts by average score, right? We're going to say that let's define popular posts as those posts with an average score higher than the average score across all posts. So basically, right, remember that ratings has likes and it has scores. See that? So we have been averaging out to calculate the posts, right? We have been averaging out the likes. What you're going to be doing is that you're going to be averaging out the scores, okay? right? So the first part of this is fairly similar to what we've been doing, but instead of likes, it's going to be scores, right? So wherever you see average likes, you're going to instead write average scores. Okay, so that's pretty simple, right? Well, that's pretty similar to what we did. So, and you're going to create a view for that, a view that is going to keep track of the average score per post. We had average likes per post. Okay. Now, in our case, it was a little more challenging because we were then going to use this view to calculate and roll it up per blog. Here, you're not being asked to roll it up per blog. You're going to stay down at the post. Okay. You're also going to calculate the average score for a post. So I'm going to create a function just like we did before, right? Where we created a function that calculates, returns the likes for a given blog. You're going to create a function that similar is going to return the average score for a post. Okay. You're also going to need, oops. Sorry about that. Go back where we were. So you're also going to need a second function, right? That is going to be the average score for all posts, just like our function calculated the average like across all blogs. You're going to create an average score across all blogs, right? And once you have those two functions, you can then do the query to come up with a query that says how is that which posts are the most popular. That makes sense? Okay. Any questions? Right. So these three you try, right? It's a little easier than what we demoed. Okay, ours is just slightly more challenging. Okay, store procedures. So store procedures, are same thing, are programs that we can write that we can run from the command line, and they're not meant for calculating a value like we did for functions, right? These functions is returns a value, and then you can use that value, that function, as part of the where clause and things like that, right? So store procedures use the same language, same kinds of things, but they're not meant to be used as functions. Okay, indeed, you can't use them in a where clause, right? It's a syntactical error, right? But you can return values if you want. You don't have to. Instead, what they're meant for is more like a script that encapsulates several updates or inserts or select statements that are useful, and you want to repeatedly use them over and over and over. Okay, so that's what we're going to be using it for. Right? We're going to be implementing a couple of operations that might be very useful for us, right? And it's also looking forward where we're going to be later after the midterm of where we're going, right? Because we're going to try and replicate this outside of the database. Okay, so here we're going to show you how to do it inside of the database using store procedures. But later on, about a week and a half from now, we're going to start looking at, well, how do you do this outside of the database, right? So we're going to create a CRUD. We're going to create CRUD operations, right? CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete blogs, right? So these are some of the most common operations that we implement for any table, okay, or any set of tables or any data model. These are some of the more common operations that we create. So we're going to create one that says find all blogs, right? So basically, this is just going to return all the blogs. The other one is going to allow it to retrieve a specific blog. If we know their ID, we can retrieve that blog. We can retrieve the blog for a user, meaning if there's a one-to-many relationship between blogs and some other, we would like to be able to group them and give us the specific blogs for that specific user, right? So we're want to be able to do that as well. Okay. All right. So then there's another function another procedure that we're going to create is called create blog for user. So this is a function that instead of us having to write every time, create blog, yada, 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 right? We like to encapsulate that in a reusable procedure that we can invoke, right, and encapsulate all the logic that we would need to do that. Update blog allows us to update the blogs, delete, and then we'll see how we can use looping, right, and branching, right, so that we can generate random blogs, that they would be useful like for testing purposes. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the first one. So first we'll create our first CRUD operation called find all blogs, right? And this was fairly simple, right? So basically we're going to call it find all blogs, and it's just going to be a select star from blogs. Okay, so let's copy that, and let's head over here to store procedures, right? I'm going to say create a new store procedure. We're going to paste that in there, and there it is, find all blogs, and we're going to apply, and there it is. We have it declared. We can then test it. We can then test it here by calling it. We can say call find all blogs. Right, we run it and it returns we only have one blog. Wait a minute, that's not one. That makes no sense. Do we have just one blog? No, we have a whole bunch of blogs. Find all blogs. Why are you returning only one? Store procedures, find. Oops. Let's take a look at it. Find all blogs. Select star from blogs. And call find blogs. Oh, result 10 results. Oh no, this is result number 10. What? Oh, all right. No, sorry. Yes, here they are. Not sure why I was just showing you one first before. Anyway, so there we go. So it's returning the whole content of the table, which is what we were expecting. Right, here's another one. Return a specific blog. So we're going to pass in a variable with the blog ID, specific blog ID that we want to return. So let's do that. Let's grab that. Right. Again, these are useful operations that we would have here to just interact with the data. All right, so let's save that. So basically, the only difference here is that we now have we have now a where clause that we're filtering only that blog whose ID is blog ID, right? So let's run that. Let's apply, and we can then just run it. We can say call find blog by ID, and if we say 3, right, it returns that number 3. Or if I say 2, right, it returns everyday astronaut. Perfect. That works. Perfect. So that's easy, right? So here's another one. We would like to retrieve all the blogs for a given user, right? Again, so let's we can create another store procedure. Let's refresh here. So let's say write create store procedure, and we can paste that in there. Again, we're just adding different criteria by which we are filtering the blogs that we want. In this case, is by the user ID, okay, which is a parameter that we can pass as an argument. So again, what this allows us to do is think about the queries, even though they might be very, very complicated. If you give it a meaningful name to your procedure, right, that kind of encapsulates what this complex query. Our queries are not that complex, yes, but what allows you to do is, group ever more sophisticated queries and procedures to create ever more complex applications, right? So let's apply, right? And then if we have users, what users do we have? We have 2, 3, right? We have Elon, so Elon is 4. So we could use that, right, to retrieve, call find blogs for user, I believe. And number 4, right, that retrieves blog everyday astronaut by user number 4. Okay. All right, excellent. Let's keep going. And then finally, well, no, not finally. Here is a create blog for user, right? So it's a function that is going to encapsulate, right, the script that allows us to insert into a table. All right, so let's grab that and let's create another store procedure here, which is going to be the CRUD part, the C in the CRUD, right? That's going to take 3 arguments. One is the user ID, the other one is the blog name, brand new blog name, and then the topic, right? And then it's going to insert, right, into the blogs table, you know, the user ID that you pass in, right, the name, the topic, and whatnot. Okay, right. So if we apply this, right, it creates a procedure, and then we can use it. We can use it to create a couple more blogs. Okay, based on the user and the topic. Now, topics, I forget which topics do we have. So we have cars in space, and then for users we have, let's see, we have a user, say Charlie Brown, right? So we could create a couple. Charlie Brown is number 5. So we can create a couple of these. We can say call create blog for user, and we can pass in arguments. I forget what the arguments were. User ID, blog, and topic. Right. So it would be user ID. So Charlie was 5. What was it? User ID, blog name. Okay, so we'll call it B1, say. And topic ID, so space. Can't type today, gee. Okay, so let's create that. Let's run that. And something went wrong. Unknown column user ID. Unknown column user ID in blogs. So what was it called? Blogs. Oh, it's just user. Just user. Okay, so we need to update our procedure. So create. Let's alter it. And this is the number of the field is called just user. So let me fix it over here. So this is just user, not user ID. Oh, wait, no, sorry. No, this user ID right here. There we go. Okay, so let's run that again. So let's apply. We're going to alter it. We're going to drop it and reapply it. And so now this should work. Let's try it again. Let's run this. Okay, that created 1. Let's create a couple more for Charlie Brown. Let's create a few of these. Right, so B2, B3, and B4. And so some of these are about cars. Okay, and so let's call this, let's call that, and let's call that. Okay, and then we can find the blogs for Charlie Brown. Oops. Oh, did I miss? Oh, I might have miswritten this, right? So find blogs for user. Let's alter store procedure. Oh, this is blog user, not user ID. So let me fix that here as well. Blog for select for user. This is user, not user ID. Okay, let's apply this again. And let's try and run it again. Let's find the blogs for user. There we go. So Charlie has 4 blogs, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 of them are about space, right? And 2 of them about cars. All right, excellent. So it looks like it worked. All right, excellent. What else? Let's see. And then here's we did create the user, the blogs for the user, so that worked. How about update blog? We can update a blog, right? So let's create another store procedure for updating blogs, right? And it's just basically wrapping the update with a function that I can call, right? Where I can give it the blog ID that I want to change, right? The new topic and the new, wait, update blogs. Ooh, I don't want to update all of them. Well, so this should be where blogs.id is equal to blog underscore ID. Right? Right. I don't want to change all of them. Right? I only want to set the new name. I'm going to rename the blog and the new topic for a given blog, not all of them. Oops. Okay, let me copy. Let me add that update. Yada yada yada. I'm missing here a where clause. There we go. There we go. Where. And like that. Okay. All right. So let's do apply. Apply. And so let's change a couple of blogs. Let's see. There's my update, and for the popular blogs, and we just created a couple blogs for Charlie. So let's change blog number B1. We change it to something else. Okay, so we're going to say call update blog, right? And we need the blog ID is number 9. We're going to change the name to be B111, and the topic is going to be cars. Okay, let's see if that works. We're going to run that. Okay, let's find all the blogs from Charlie, and it didn't work. What? How come it didn't work? Did I write it wrong? Let's see. What does the chat say? Should we put comments on the store procedures about what they do? Yes, it's always a good practice to put comments. Very good. Yes. You forgot a quote. Let's see. The chat says that I forgot about a quote. Let's alter it. Oh, you mean in the in here? I forgot a quote. Oh, yeah. This should be a quote, right? This should be quotes. Let's run that again. And let's see if that worked. Okay, it did work. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so we changed it from B1 to B1111, right? And we changed the topic, so that works. Finally, let's do one more. We want to create a whole bunch of random blogs, right? So let's copy this. Let's copy this, and let's create another store procedure. Say create a store procedure, and let's take a look at this store procedure, right? So here we're trying to create several random blogs, right? So let's put these parameters in 2 lines. So this says create random blogs. How many, right? How many random blogs do I want? And for which user? So these blogs belong to who? Are they going to belong to Charlie, right? Or are they going to belong to someone else? So we're going to declare here a couple of local variables, I, right, an integer, and the default value is 0. And then we're also going to choose a prefix. So we're gonna use a text like random blog, and we're going to append a postfix, right? So we're going to append to a piece of text. We're going to append an index, right? So it's going to be like random blog number 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? As many counts as we want, right? For a particular user. And then we're going to concatenate the whole thing into one random blog name, okay? To do that, we're going to have a while loop, right? So we're going to say while I is less than count, right? Count minus 1, do the following, right? And we're gonna increment the count, from 0, it'll be 1, right? Then we're going to calculate a random postfix, and we're going to come up with a random blog name based on the concatenation of the text literal random blog concatenated with the random postfix. Okay, and then we're going to do the insert. We're going to insert into the blogs table, right, using into the name, topic, and user ID field. And I think this might be wrong. I think it's just user. So it's user here. User. The values here of the blog name, then the topic The default topic, we're going to go with space. And then user ID is an argument that we pass here. Okay, so let's try it out. Let's say apply. Let's apply. So let's go back to Charlie Brown and let's have Charlie Brown create a whole bunch of random blogs. And so let's go here. And so what's the name of the procedure? Oh, did I say apply? I forget. I don't remember if I said apply. Let's say apply. I guess I did apply already. Okay, so let's call it. Let's call it. We're going to say call create random blogs for user number, count. How many do we want? Let's create 10 for user number 5, which is Charlie Brown. We're going to say 5, right? And then we can say run this. And I don't know if that worked. So let's go and ask for the blogs for Charlie Brown. And it looks like works. There it is, right? There we go. Okay, those are the 10 random blogs, right? So random blog number 100, 82, 10, 4, 92, yada, 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 all space and all belonging to user number 5. That makes sense, right? So this just gives you a glimpse of what is possible. Obviously in here, you can do all sorts of, very complex operations on deciding what you want to insert, right? What you want to update. So you can have a fairly complex algorithm query, whereas this typically executes as part of you just invoking it from the command line, like we're doing here. Okay, so 2 different ways. We haven't yet played around with triggers. We'll play around with triggers a little later, right? I think I don't want to complicate this assignment more than it is, right? So hopefully you can follow along and take the examples that I have written here and you can create your own. Now for yourself on your own, having followed this having implemented all these, find all blogs, find blog by ID, yada, 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 delete, create. Now on your own, go ahead and implement something similar, but for posts, right? So you're going to create a find post by ID, find posts for blog, right? Create posts for a blog, update post, delete post, and create random posts. Okay. All right. On your own, you do that. Now deliverables. All right. So deliverables are going to be 3 deliverables. Right. One is the file that we worked on together, right? Popular blogs.sql. Right. This is going to be on your own. You're going to do popular posts SQL on your own. You can do that. And then you're going to do a database export. So you're going to export the data. Now the database export is not going to include these SQL files, right? So they're going to be separate files. Right? So for the database export, you need to export tables and views as well. Tables, views, and functions, right? And so to export, here I have a small little graphic on how to do it, right? You can come here. You can you double click on the database that you're going to work on, right? Then you go to server export, and by default, right? If you go to DB design, so by default it checks all the tables. These are the tables, right? Blogs, follows, posts, ratings, and the views. See that? Those views as well are going to be exported. There we go. See that? But by default, it does not. Well, actually, mine are selected, right? Notice that I selected that I also want to store procedures and functions. See that? And also the triggers. But yours might not be selected, so don't forget to select it, right? So make sure that that one is selected, so that it will include also the store procedures and the functions. Right? If you don't select it, it will not dump the procedures and functions as well. Right? So and then you can just type start import, and it will create a. If it gives you any error message, doesn't matter. Right? Just say go anyway. Okay, so it's exported into the directory. You're going to zip that folder. You zip up that folder, and you're going to submit the database export zipped up file plus the 2 SQL files. Okay. Anyway, that is the assignments, right? Hopefully they'll give you a chance to practice programming the database from within the database. Next week, we're going to focus on programming the database outside of the database. Okay. All right. Let's review the material for that we've covered so far. So I've given you a demo on what you're going to be doing for the week that will allow you to practice it. Let's now go back to the slides and let's review all the material, make sure that we haven't missed anything. All right. So before we get started, any questions about the assignment? Okay. All right, so if there are no questions in the assignment, let's take a look at this presentation. Some of this is a review from what we talked about last week, right? So we want to be able to encapsulate a lot of some of the repetitive tasks, right? And we want to use some constructs that we are familiar with programming languages, right? That SQL, kind of restricts us on what we can do. Us being developers, we don't want to be restricted. We know that if we would have access to a full-blown programming language, we could do all sorts of really cool things, right? So definitely store procedures, functions, triggers is going to expand, dramatically the kinds of things that we can do. We're going to have variables like you would expect in a programming language. We're going to have flow control, right? Now, obviously, there has pros and cons, right? It allows you to encapsulate things that are complex into, if you use a good naming convention, right? You can easily understand what a very complex algorithm might do, right? So you can abstract it and forget about the details, right? So that you can then build upon these as if they were, small Lego pieces that allow you to build more complex structures. Security, obviously, right, as opposed to being, outside of the system, you are right in, you can only execute these algorithms if you are already logged in and you have already the permissions and security clearance to log in and execute these algorithms, right? Obviously, being very close to the database, you're running right in the same machine, CPU and memory space as the database, right? So this is the fastest that you can possibly write something that has direct access to the database. Obviously, this is a new set of tools that you need to learn, maintain, right? You're putting more burden on the database CPU so that right, it takes it away from responding to queries, right? That would be perhaps it would be the main task of a database is to be able to answer query questions, right? So you have to be careful and balance that your algorithms are not so complex that they burden the CPU and the machine that they're being run on, right? So it's a new programming language, right? That you have to maintain and do all the software engineering around what any source code merits. Yes, we said that there were 3 types of executables, right? We just demoed 2 types. We took a look at the functions and we looked at procedures, right? And functions, again, they're meant for be executed as part of a statement, a SQL statement, where you can use it to compare values, right? And so that the function can return a value, and that value can then be used in the where clause or anywhere in the select statement, right? They're meant for returning always a piece of data that we can then compare against something else. They're not meant for changing any data. So any inserts, any updates, any deletes inside of a functions is a no-no. Instead, if you want to include data manipulation, right, you would instead use procedures, right, where you can do inserts, updates, deletes, obviously select statements, right, and you can return data if you want, right, and they're executed from the command line. Now, triggers, which we haven't looked at, right, is is a type of executable that instead of you running it from the command line, instead they are meant to be executed when an event occurs, right? When they can listen in for any modifications that you're doing to the database. Say you're inserting into a table, or you're updating a table, or you're deleting from a table, right? The triggers can trigger, right? The event of inserting, the event of updating can trigger the execution of these triggers, of these algorithms, so that they can look at what you're trying to do, and vote on whether it's allowed or not. That maybe it's not allowed that so and so can insert or update or delete, or it might give you a chance for you to massage the data or validate the data, right, and make sure that the data that you are inserting is valid. Or it might allow you to do some auditing, right, where you want to make sure, you want to jot down a history of different updates, so that you can have a histogram of who updated what, right, and so that there's an accountability of any actions that somebody might have taken. So triggers, very, very powerful. So let's look at first functions, right? So to create a function, you just use the create function command. You give it the name of the function, right? Any optional parameters, and then you can go in and start typing, within the begin and the end. We said about the delimiter, right? So that we can postpone the execution of these select statements that are inside of the functions. We want to execute them later when we run them. From Workbench is really easy. You just go into the functions and do a create function, and it gives you this default content for the function. You can override the name of the function, right? That and the return type, and then have a simple algorithm in there, right? And we saw very easily. We did this last time around. We just ran this select, just adding 2 plus 2, right? Or adding just A plus B. So it's some really trivial examples. And then we saw that we can use that select statement as part, those functions as part of the selects, or even in the where clause, right? In the assignment, we saw that we can put them inside the where clause. Okay. All right. Let's see what else. We also saw that we can generate not only numerical data, but you can also generate string data, right? And here we're returning the string hello world. Okay, so let's look at the store procedures. So store procedures, again, instead of create function, is create procedures, right? And same thing, we do. We can right click in this under the store procedures, and we can add a new store procedure, and we give it the name of the procedure. And in here, we are meant to encapsulate algorithms that entail the manipulation, retrieval and manipulation of data, right? So in this case, we are retrieving data. We might encapsulate some very complex query that we might want to invoke as we would invoke any function, right? But here functions mean something else, right? I mean function in the software engineering sense, right? That we want to re-execute this algorithm at some point later. Here's another where clause, where retrieve all the salaries greater than or equal to some value s, right? Now, different. You have to be careful, since the syntax of invoking procedures might be slightly different depending on the vendor that you're using. Under MySQL, you use the keyword call. If you're under a SQL Server, a Microsoft SQL Server, then the keyword is exec or execute as opposed to call. Again, depending on the vendor, you might need to look at some slightly different syntax on certain things about store procedures. If you want to modify the procedure, you can say alter procedure, and then most of the time it just entails dropping or just throwing away the old procedure and just recreating it brand new. So usually this entails also doing an if exists, right, to verify that this is not going to fail if you try to remove or drop something that might not exist. So here's an example of the alter command, where you can just say alter procedure, and then you give it the brand new body of the procedure, right? Or you could just drop it and redefine the whole thing from scratch. You can, or from inside a Workbench, you can just say, right click on the procedure and say alter procedure. So let's take a look at the parameters, right? So parameters. Now when parameters are optional in stored procedures and in functions, right? And by default, those parameters are defined as in or input parameters, right? So input in, right? So here notice that there's in brackets, meaning that that is the default interpretation of a parameter that you're passing. This is true for functions and procedures. And and what it means is that these when you pass values to these procedures, right, you're passing a copy of that value, right? So if you pass, say you have a variable x, right, and you pass that variable x to the procedure will have the value of x, but it will not have a reference to x, right? And the importance here is very important, right? If you're passing the value, then you would never be able to manipulate the original variable, right? This in programming, we call this pass by value, right? Pass by value, right? Which you cannot change the original variable. Now out is you have to explicitly put a variable to be out, and in here the meaning here is that you are meant from within the procedure to set the value of that variable as a return, right? As if you were returning this value back to the user, or back to whoever called you, right? And if whoever passed you the variable to this parameter, right, that value would be ignored, right? You would not be able to access it or manipulate it from within the procedure. And finally, you have in out, right? You can say that a variable behaves as both in and out, right? And this is the equivalent in programming languages to pass by reference, right? And pass by reference means that if I pass you a variable x, right, not only do you get the value of x, right, but you get the actual x, meaning you can manipulate x, right? You can change the value of the original variable of x. Okay, so in, you can treat it as, you can think of it as pass by value, and in out you can think of it as pass by reference, right? Out is kind of like in the middle. All right, so here's just a couple examples on calling a procedure, and you have a variable b that has been declared as in. See that? In. And so notice that internally it's trying to set the value of b to equal to b plus 1. Okay? So the intent here, notice that we're passing. Notice that we're calling that procedure call in parameter example here. We're passing it with a local variable a, which has been set as 1, 2, 3. Right. So if we look at the initial value of a, it's 1, 2, 3. There it is. Now, when we pass the value of a, notice that over here is being incremented by 1. Okay, and then if we look at the value of b over here, it's 1, 2, 4, which is what we would expect. But then after we call the procedure, we ask ourselves, well, what happened to the value of a? Did the value of a change? Well, it didn't, right? If we look at the value of a, notice that it's back to its original value of 1, 2, 3. It never changed, actually. It never changed. So basically, this is behaving exactly like pass by value, right? Where we are passing the value 1, 2, 3. B has the value 1, 2, 3. It does not have a. It has the value 1, 2, 3. So when you're changing here from 1, 2, 3 to 1, 2, 4, you're changing the value of the local variable b, but the remote value of a was never ever changed at all, right? Pass by value. Now, if we look at out, so out, here we have declared b to be out, right? And we are passing again the same value of a, 1, 2, 3, and we can look at the we can't even look at the value of b here. If I try to select B, right, it won't have any value. I can't even use it. I can't even use its original value, even though I'm passing it. Right, I don't have the value of A here because it's meant for output, right? It's meant for me to set the value, but never to read it, right? It's meant for me setting the value of B. So now B is 321, and I have indeed changed the value of A. But from within the parameter, within the procedure, I could never have seen any value that you have passed me, right? You have not, even though you passed me 1, 2, 3, internally, I don't even know that the original value of B was 1, 2, 3. It's only meant for me to send you back a value. Okay, so notice that indeed A has changed from 1 to 3, has changed from to 3 to 1. And finally, is in-out. So in-out behaves just like pass by reference. And pass by reference is that if I pass you A, I'm not passing the value 1, 2, 3. Instead, B here is bound to the reference of A, right? So that when I change B here, I am changing the original A, okay? So that if I increment it, right, from 1 to 3, I'm changing it to 1 to 4. Make sense? Those are the 3 types of variables types of parameter that I can pass in and what the behavior would be. All right, so let's look at variables. So variables are, they could be global variables like we've seen here, these variables right there, right? You can pass them in. You can just declare variables. Notice the at in front, right? And this means that these are user variables that I am declaring myself. Okay. And you can also have variables that are declared internally inside of the procedure, right? So let's take an example here, right, where we are passing an in of PID, right, presumably a person ID, and a new role that we want to change. So we're going to update the record P. We're going to set the value of P being the table P, person P. We're changing the role to a new role and the ID, where the ID is what we pass in as an argument. Right, so there it is. We change it to faculty. Now, say we want to raise somebody's salary, right? And so we pass in the ID of the person and the percentage of how much I want to give it a raise, right? So I'm updating the salary, right? And I'm making it equal to the salary multiplied by 1 plus the percent, right? So for instance, I'm increasing the percentage from 1,000 to $1,500, okay? All right, so let's talk about local variables, right, inside of these store procedures, right? We saw examples of this before when we looked at the assignment, right? Where we can declare local variables by using the keyword declare, the name of the variable, and then the type, whether it's int, float, varchar, whatever, and then we can give it a default value. We saw an example of that in the assignments. Okay. So here's just a couple of variables that you can declare and different data types. We can declare integers, varchars, timestamps, right, to have some default current date or current date time, right? Or you can declare several variables, one after another, of the same data type by using comma, right? Comma, then v1, v comma, v2, comma, v3. And then to change that value, over time, you can use the keyword set. Okay. So here's an example of declaring several variables, just like we did for the assignments, right? Declaring them at the top of the begin, right, before we go in and start inserting or updating or selecting or reading data from the database. Going back to the difference between variables that are declared inside the procedures and variables that are declared outside the procedures, let's see how they behave, right? So for instance, here we're declaring a var2 here that's declared outside of the procedure, and which is initialized to be a value of 1. Okay, and in here we're declaring a brand new variable number 2. Notice that this is a local variable, meaning that it gets created inside of the procedure, and then when it's done at the end of the procedure, it's gone, right? It doesn't exist anymore. So it has a local scope. So we initialize var2 to be 1. We set var2, we increment it by 1. We also increment our user variable by 1 as well. Okay, and then we display both of them, var2 comma var at var2, and they both come back as 2, as you would expect. But what happens if you run it again? If you run it again, okay, notice that the user variable is increasing every time you run the procedure, right? Because it's a variable, it's kind of like a global variable, right? That is declared outside of the procedure, whereas so that it goes from 2 to 3 and then 3 to 4. Whereas the variable number 2, the variable 2, because it's declared inside of the procedure, right? It gets recreated and initialized to 1 every single time. So that's why it never increments more than just 2, right? Conditionals, right? Again, like any serious programming language, you have full-blown branching, like you would, in any serious programming language. So here you have if statements, that allow you to have a Boolean expression, right? And based on the whether that is true or false, right, allow you to execute either one branch or another branch, right? So here we have, if the variable is 0, then we return the select, one particular select. If it's equal to something else, right, then we are doing another select or some insert or some update, right? So you can have any number of branches based on your Boolean expression. You can follow a particular path or not, right? Case, right, allows you to implement things such a switch case, right, where you can compare a specific expression. You can compare it against multiple values, like a switch case, exactly, right? You can do switch on a particular variable and then case. So same thing here, right? Just a slightly different syntax, right? When 0, when 1. So these values 0, 1, and whatnot are compared against this variable. And based on that variable, which one is it's the value, it matches the value, then it executes the specific set of code or lines in that clause, right? One thing that this is different from the switch case from Java or C# or JavaScript, right, is that here you don't need the break, right? This is strictly, it only executes what's for that particular when, right? It's not like Java, right, where if you don't put a break, right, if you don't put a break, it'll just fall through and execute everything after that, right? Here, you don't need to put the break. It is implied. You only execute that 1 or 2 or 3 lines inside of the when clause or inside of the then clause. So in that sense, it's slightly different. And this else is like the default in Java or C# or JavaScript, right? And if it doesn't match any of the previous cases, then it executes the else. There's a more powerful version of this where instead of having case and you have the expression, you have the expression at the top, instead of doing that, you have this version where in the case you don't have any expression, and then instead you have an expression in each one of the when clauses, right? This is more akin to having multiple if else, if else, if else, if else, if else, right? Where each one of the expression is evaluated independently, right? And if it's true, right, these could be completely independent predicates that have nothing to do with one another. Well, obviously, logically, they should have something to do with each other, right? That presumably they're mutually exclusive, presumably, right? And the one that's true, well, the one they value to true, that's the one insert or update or delete or select that you're going to execute. Okay. All right. So finally, let's talk about looping. All right. So a loop, like you would expect, right? It allows you to iterate, right? To do something multiple times over and over and over. Right. So there are 3 types of loops, right? There's the while do that we saw in our example in our assignment, right? That's due next week, right? We have a while do. There's also just plain old loop, and there's repeat until. Okay, so in the while, like we saw earlier, right? You stay inside of the loop as long as a predicate is true, right? And in this case, the you execute, you enter the loop only if the predicate is true first, right? As opposed to repeat until. Repeat until is the opposite, right? The repeat until allows you to execute the body of the repeat until at least once, right? Whereas the while do, right, you first need to pass the hurdle of this predicate to be true, right? So that you can enter the body of the while, right? And then as opposed to the repeat. The repeat allows you to execute the body at least once, right? And if the until predicate is true, then it allows you to just do it again, right? But notice that this repeat allows you to execute the set at least once, right? Even if the predicate was false to begin with, right? And then finally we have loop, right? Loop allows you to set up multiple labels, right? And then jump, right? Jump to a specific label, right? Up again, right? And you can have multiple, label 1, label 2, label 3, right? And then you can say, loop label 1, loop label 2, right? So that you can almost like a go-to, right? But from within a function or within a procedure, right? It's not like you can jump outside of the function or procedure. You would have to stay within that scope, right? Or you can break out, right, of a particular loop, right, by using the keyword leave, right, so that you can jump outside of that loop. All right. Triggers. So triggers, as I mentioned earlier, right? So remember, there's 3 types of executables, right? There's the functions that allow you to run calculate some number or some value that you can then use in the where clause. You have procedures, which are the most generic, right? That allows you to automate scripts that are going to be insert, update, delete, and whatnot. And then triggers allow you to execute algorithms based on some event that occurs, right, on a specific table, right? For instance, if you can listen in to see if somebody is inserting or updating or deleting records from a table, and then you get a chance to decide whether that is correct or not, or do extra things, right? You can look at the values that are being inserted or updated, and then you can decide whether to let it go through or not. You can abort the operation. You can maybe do some auditing, and then jot down a history of what's going on, right? So you can generate all sorts of collateral side effects, right? Of a something that would be a simple insert or simple update. You can generate all sorts of collateral side effects, right? That triggered from this one single event. So to create a trigger, we use the keyword create trigger. You give it the name of the trigger, and then you say when it should happen, and what event should happen, and on which table should happen. Okay, you can say that you want this to happen for every record that is being updated, right? Or for all the inserts that are being updated, or you can say it by table, right? So if there's one update for table per table, you can say do it once. So say that you're updating 3 records, you can decide that this triggers for all 3 records, or you can decide that it triggers for the table itself, right? So if you're inserting 3 records in table A, you can decide whether you just want this trigger to run once for table A, or you want to run it for every single record that you're inserting or updating or deleting, right? You can also decide, when do you want to trigger this? When you're updating, when you're deleting, right? Or when you're inserting, right? And then on which table are you listening to? Okay, and then you can say for each row or for each table, for the table, and then the begin and the end. So a very common naming convention for triggers, so that we can understand from the name what's doing, what's happening, is the trigger time, right? Oh yeah, no, trigger time. Yeah, let me back up a little bit. So trigger time is when do you want this to happen? Do you want it to happen before the action takes place or after it takes place, right? So for instance, if you want to take a look at the data that you are inserting or updating and maybe have a chance to say, no, that's bad data, I don't want that data. Well, that would have to happen before, right? Before the insert or the update actually happens, right? You want to take a look at it and says, well, no, I don't like that. Or you can decide that it's after, right? So for instance, you might want to, so after somebody has inserted a record, you want to make sure, you want to look at the resulting record, right? And say, okay, well, now that it's been inserted and I now need to know what the ID that was inserted, maybe the date, the timestamp that was created. And then I can take that data to then go off and do other things, right? And insert more stuff, right? Maybe I know that if every time I insert a new record, a new user, a new student, right? Well, that means that I need to also insert into a whole bunch of other tables, right? Maybe I need to put them in the meal plan, right? I have to make sure that they're in the correct role, that they have the correct housing, right? That they're right in the financials, inserted into the financial aid table, right? So I could trigger all these things to happen after a new student has been admitted, right? And then I need to do all these other things. So you can decide whether you want to do before or after, whether it's an insert, update, and delete, right? And what table. So a common naming convention is that the trigger is the following naming. So it's going to be the trigger time, whether it's before, the name of the table, and then the event. So an example might be before employee updates, right? That's a common name. Right? Before I update the employee, I want this to happen. Okay, so here's an example, right? We're creating a table called employees audit, right? And so we're going to be using this table, for instance, to audit whenever something happens to an employee, right? So maybe an employee gets a raise, or the employee gets moved from one department to another department, whatever happens to the employee, we want to audit and keep a history of what happened to that employee. Okay, so we have an auto increment. We have the employee number, we have the last name, we have the when this happened, this change that the employee was moved between departments, or they got a raise, or whatever happened, right? We want to keep track of when it happened, and the action, what happened, what is it that happened to this employee. Okay, so we could create a trigger that says, before the employee is updated, right? I'm going to call it that way, right? So here's the when, right? Or the time. Here's the event update on employee. So create the trigger. So it's before update on employees, right? And then I want this to trigger for every row. So if there's an update that is updating 10 employees, well, I want to be notified. I want this trigger to run 10 times, one for each row. Okay, and what am I going to do? Well, I might now insert into the audit table. I might insert into the employees audit table. I want to say that the action was an update. The employee number, notice old here, right? It allows me to, because it's before, right? It allows me to see what, since I'm updating a record, I'm sorry, here I'm inserting old employee number, old employee number, last name, old last name. I can see the values that you're trying to put in there and insert, right? And I can take a look at that by using this keyword old. So old gives me the record, right, that you're trying to insert, right? And then I can decide whether I want that record, that value that you're trying to set, if I want to keep it as is, or I might massage it. I might make a couple of changes, right? Or and decide what the value that you're trying to insert or update or modify, right? And decide whether that value is okay. And it provides these values through a temporary record, right, that is old, called old, that has the same fields as if it were a regular record. Okay, that it doesn't live inside the actual, in any table, in any actual record, but it gives you the values that you're trying to insert into the database. Okay, and you can also decide what the new values would be, right? If you're inserting what the new values would be, and decide what to do with them. Okay. Oops. Ooh, that's all I have. Okay, that's all I have. So anyway, so there will be an assignment, the next assignment, which would be after the midterm, where we're going to play around with triggers, right? And give us a chance to practice with triggers alongside with starting to play around with Java and being able to program the database outside of the database as opposed to programming it inside of the database. Okay. All right. That's all I have for you. Any questions? It's be the old department would be they're changing old department. Yes, exactly. Yep. Yeah, I'll have a couple more examples in the assignments, and we'll run through them, and I'll demo actually creating that for you. All right, any questions? All right then, thank you everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Professor.
Thanks, Professor.
Cheers, bye-bye.